Everyone mocked the man who lived in a rocky cave on the edge of town, calling him crazy, calling him broken, until he opened a hidden tunnel and discovered $300 million that had been buried beneath his feet the entire time. Before we dive into this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The Arizona sun beat down on Copper Ridge like it had a personal grudge. Heat shimmered off the cracked asphalt of Main Street, distorting the few remaining storefronts that hadn't been boarded up yet. The town was dying slowly, the way small mining towns do when the ore runs out and the young people leave. Population 462 and dropping every year. On the eastern edge of town, where the desert hills rose up in layers of red and orange stone, there was a cave. Not a tourist attraction, not some geological wonder marked on maps. Just a cave. And in that cave lived Marcus Dane, the man everyone called crazy. Marcus was 43 years old, though the desert sun and 5 years of hard living had carved lines into his face that made him look older. His hair was sun-bleached and wild, pulled back in a ponytail that hadn't seen a proper barber in half a decade. His hands were calloused and scarred, nails perpetually outlined with red desert dirt no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. He wore the same rotation of faded work shirts and jeans, patched and repatched until they were more repair than original fabric. But his eyes, those were different, sharp, alert. The eyes of someone who saw things others missed. The eyes of a trained geologist, even if no one remembered that's what he used to be. It was a Tuesday morning when Marcus emerged from the cave entrance, squinting against the brutal sunlight. He carried 2 empty water jugs in each hand, heading down the narrow path he'd worn into the hillside over 5 years of the same routine. Twice a week, he'd make the 20-minute walk into town to fill his jugs at the public pump behind the old fire station. Twice a week, he'd endure the stares, the whispers, the occasional cruel joke shouted from a passing pickup truck. The walk into Copper Ridge took him past the shuttered mining equipment warehouse, past the elementary school where only 32 kids still attended, past the gas station where the price per gallon hadn't changed in 3 years because nobody bothered to update the sign anymore. Marcus kept his head down, focused on the cracked sidewalk beneath his boots. "Well, look what crawled out of the rocks," a voice called out. Marcus didn't have to look up to know it was Brett Holloway, 26 years old, and still acting like he was the high school quarterback. Brett leaned against his truck outside the hardware store, arms crossed, flanked by his usual crew, 2 other guys who'd peaked in their teens and never figured out what came next. Marcus said nothing. He'd learned years ago that engaging only made it worse. "Hey, caveman, I'm talking to you," Brett pushed off the truck, stepping into Marcus's path. "You smell like bat shit today. That's a new low, even for you." The other 2 laughed on cue. Marcus stopped, met Brett's eyes with a steady gaze that held no fear, no anger, just tired resignation. "Excuse me," he said quietly, moving to step around. Brett shifted to block him again. "You know, my cousin works for the county, says you're squatting on public land, says they could kick you out any time they want." "Then I guess I'll deal with that when it happens," Marcus replied. He moved around Brett before the younger man could block him again, continuing toward the fire station. Behind him, he heard Brett mutter something about crazy old bastard and his friends laughing. But Marcus kept walking. The fire station's water pump was in the back, next to where they used to wash the trucks. Marcus filled his jugs methodically, testing the temperature with his finger first, the way he always did. The water ran cold and clean, one of the few things in Copper Ridge that still worked the way it was supposed to. "Marcus," a voice called softly. He turned to see Vera Chen, 68 years old, owner of Vera's Diner on Main Street. She carried a paper bag spotted with grease. "Saved you some biscuits and gravy from breakfast. Would have just gone to waste anyway." Marcus's throat tightened. Vera was one of maybe 3 people in town who still treated him like a human being. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," Vera said, pressing the bag into his hands. "But I'm going to anyway. You eat those while they're still warm." "Thank you," Marcus said, meaning it more than those 2 words could convey. Vera studied his face with the same look his mother used to give him, the one that saw past the dirt and the worn clothes to the person underneath. "You hanging in there?" "Always do," Marcus replied. "That daughter of yours coming by this weekend?" Marcus nodded. "Saturday, if she doesn't cancel again." Vera's expression softened with understanding. She patted his arm, said nothing more, and headed back toward her diner. Marcus watched her go, then hefted his water jugs and began the long walk back to the cave. The truth was, Marcus Dane hadn't always lived in a cave. 5 years ago, he'd been Dr. Marcus Dane, senior geologist for Apex Mining Corporation, pulling in a 6-figure salary and living in a 4-bedroom house in Phoenix with his wife Rebecca and their daughter Autumn. He'd been respected, successful, on track for a promotion that would have set his family up for life. Then came the Silverton project. Marcus had been assigned to assess a potential mining site in northern Nevada. The initial surveys looked promising, indications of a significant copper deposit that could be worth hundreds of millions. Apex invested heavily based on his preliminary reports. They brought in equipment, hired crews, sank millions into infrastructure before the first actual excavation began. Marcus had urged caution. His deeper analysis showed geological inconsistencies, signs that the deposit might be smaller than initial surveys suggested, or that the rock formations were unstable. He'd filed report after report, but the executives were already committed. They had investors to satisfy, quarterly projections to meet. They told Marcus his concerns were noted and to proceed with the excavation. 3 months in, the entire western shaft collapsed. 2 workers were injured, thankfully not killed, but millions of dollars in equipment was buried. The deposit turned out to be a fraction of what was promised. Apex's stock plummeted. Lawsuits followed. The company needed a scapegoat, and Marcus's early optimistic reports, the ones filed before his concerns, made him the perfect target. They fired him, publicly blamed him for the disaster, made sure every mining company in the country knew his name, and associated it with failure and incompetence. His professional reputation was destroyed overnight. No one in the industry would touch him. His credentials, his doctorate, his 15 years of experience, none of it mattered anymore. He was the geologist who cost Apex Mining $200 million. Rebecca had tried to stand by him at first, but as the months dragged on and Marcus couldn't find work, couldn't even get interviews, the stress fractured their marriage like a fault line under pressure. The argument started bitter and exhausting. She accused him of being too proud to take other work. He accused her of not understanding what it meant to have your life's work destroyed. Their 12-year-old daughter Autumn watched her family splinter with wide, frightened eyes. The house went first. They couldn't make the mortgage payments. Rebecca moved in with her sister in Copper Ridge temporarily, taking Autumn with her. The temporary arrangement became permanent when she started dating Dale Morrison, a real estate developer who still had money and prospects, and a future that didn't involve sleeping on a sister's couch. Marcus had lived in his car for a while, taking odd jobs where he could find them. But even that fell apart. The car broke down one day outside Copper Ridge while he was visiting Autumn. He didn't have the money to fix it. Rebecca's sister made it clear he wasn't welcome to stay with them. So Marcus started looking for alternatives. That's when he found the cave. It was part of an old formation about 2 miles outside town, where the hills rose up against the desert sky. The entrance was partially hidden by brush and rocks, but Marcus's trained eye recognized it immediately. He explored carefully, mapping the interior with a flashlight and notebook out of pure habit. The main chamber was about 20 feet deep and 15 feet wide, with a ceiling high enough to stand in. Smaller passages branched off, some ending quickly, one leading deeper into the hillside that he couldn't fully explore without better equipment. But the main chamber was dry, relatively clean, and completely free. Marcus moved in with the few possessions he had left, some clothes, his old geology textbooks and journals, basic tools, and a determination to survive that surprised even him. That was 5 years ago. Now, as Marcus climbed the path back to the cave with his water jugs and Vera's paper bag of food, he surveyed what had become his home. He'd improved it over the years, one small upgrade at a time. Solar panels he'd salvaged from a warehouse demolition provided enough power for lights and a small hot plate. He'd built a rainwater collection system using tarps and barrels for the monsoon season. The entrance was partially covered with a heavy tarp he could tie back during the day and seal at night or during storms. Inside, the cave was surprisingly organized. Marcus had always been methodical, and poverty hadn't changed that. His sleeping bag was rolled neatly in one corner next to a plastic bin containing his clothes. A makeshift kitchen area consisted of the hot plate, some stacked crates serving as pantry and countertop, and a small cooler he kept stocked with ice from town when he could afford it. The walls were covered with geological maps he'd drawn over the years, both of the cave system itself and of the surrounding area, old habits dying hard. Rock samples lined makeshift shelves, each labeled in his precise handwriting. His old journals were stacked carefully, protected from moisture in sealed plastic bags. Tools hung on pegs he'd driven into cracks in the rock. Hammers of different sizes, chisels, a pickaxe, coils of rope, headlamps, safety equipment he'd accumulated. Some he'd bought from yard sales or thrift stores, others he'd found abandoned at old mining sites around the area. To an outsider, it might look like a homeless man's collection of junk. To Marcus, each tool was possibility, the means to continue the only work he'd ever really loved. At the back of the main chamber, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was something that had always intrigued him. A passage sealed by what looked like deliberate rockfall. Not a natural collapse. Marcus could tell the difference. Someone at some point had blocked this tunnel intentionally. He'd noticed it during his first exploration of the cave, but had never had the resources or equipment to excavate it properly. It remained one of those mysteries he told himself he'd investigate someday when he had time and tools. Marcus set down his water jugs, hung up the empty bags he'd carried them in, and sat on the folding chair he'd positioned near the entrance where the light was best. He opened Vera's paper bag and ate slowly, savoring the biscuits and gravy that was still warm. Real food, cooked by someone else, served on actual plates before being transferred to this bag. It was a luxury he never took for granted. As he ate, his mind drifted to Autumn. 17 now, a junior in high school. She'd grown up so much in 5 years, and he'd missed most of it. Their visits had become less frequent as she got older, more involved in school activities, more embedded in the life Rebecca and Dale provided. A life with a house, with stability, with everything Marcus couldn't give her. She'd cancelled the last 2 Saturday visits. Dance practice one week, a friend's birthday party the next. Marcus understood, even if it hurt. What teenager wanted to spend their weekend visiting their father in a cave? He was an embarrassment to her, and he knew it. The kids at school knew about him. How could they not in a town this small? The caveman's daughter. He could only imagine the teasing she endured. But she still came, sometimes. That had to count for something. Marcus finished his meal, carefully folded the paper bag to use later for kindling, and pulled out one of his journals. He spent the afternoon the way he spent most afternoons, studying, documenting, doing the work of a geologist despite having no one to report his findings to. He sketched rock formations, noted erosion patterns, recorded water flow data from the seasonal washes. It kept his skills sharp, gave his days structure, reminded him he was more than just a crazy hermit living in a cave. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, Marcus stood at the cave entrance and looked out over Copper Ridge. Lights were coming on in the scattered houses, smoke rising from chimneys, even though it was still warm. From this distance, the town almost looked peaceful, like somewhere people were happy. He knew better. Saturday arrived the way it always did, indifferent to anticipation or dread. Marcus woke with the sun, made coffee on his hot plate using grounds he'd stretched thin to make them last, and started his morning routine. He washed using water from his collected supply, changed into his least worn shirt, even attempted to tame his wild hair into something resembling respectability. Autumn would arrive around 10 if she came at all. At 9:55, he heard the sound of a car engine laboring up the rough path. His heart lifted despite his best efforts to keep expectations low. She came. She actually came. The car that appeared was Rebecca's sedan. Well, technically it was Dale's sedan that Rebecca drove, a newer model Toyota that looked absurdly clean and civilized against the desert backdrop. It stopped about 50 feet from the cave entrance, as close as the path allowed. The passenger door opened and Autumn stepped out. She'd changed her hair since the last visit, cut shorter, dyed with purple streaks. She wore jeans and a band t-shirt, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She moved like she was forcing herself to walk toward the cave, each step a small act of will. "Hey, Dad," she said when she was close enough, her voice carefully neutral. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus replied, resisting the urge to hug her. She was at the age where physical affection from parents was mortifying. "Thanks for coming." Autumn shrugged, glancing back at the car where Rebecca sat in the driver's seat, engine still running. "Mum's going to run some errands. She'll be back in an hour." An hour. Autumn had negotiated her visit time down to an hour. Marcus swallowed his disappointment and smiled. "That's fine. Come on in. I made coffee if you want some." "I'm good," Autumn said, but she followed him into the cave. She looked around the space the way she always did, with a mixture of pity and discomfort that she tried to hide but never quite succeeded. "So, how have you been?" "Can't complain," Marcus said, which was his standard answer because complaining accomplished nothing. "How's school?" "Fine. Same stuff." Autumn picked up one of his rock samples, turned it over in her hands without really seeing it. "We're doing this college prep thing. Guidance counselor wants everyone to start thinking about applications." "That's good. You thinking about what you want to study?" "I don't know. Maybe business or communications." She set the rock down. "Something normal." The word hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Something normal, unlike her father's obsession with rocks and minerals that had destroyed their family. Marcus felt the familiar ache in his chest, but pushed it down. "Those are good fields," he said carefully. "Lots of opportunities." Autumn nodded, falling silent. She wandered to the back of the cave, studying the maps on the walls. "Do you ever think about doing something else, like getting a regular job?" "I've tried," Marcus said, honesty being the only thing he had left to give her. "No one will hire me, not in geology, not in anything related, and other jobs they see a 43-year-old guy who's been unemployed for 5 years and living in a cave. Doesn't exactly inspire confidence." "You could leave Copper Ridge, go somewhere no one knows you." "And leave you?" Marcus asked quietly. Autumn's jaw tightened. "Dad, I'm going to college in a year anyway. You're not leaving me. You're just, I don't know, staying stuck here." "This is where you are," Marcus said. "This is where I need to be." "I'm fine," Autumn said, her voice rising slightly. "Mum and Dale take care of me. I have a house, I have a room, I have everything I need. You don't have to live in a cave just to be near me when I barely even visit." The words were meant to hurt, and they did. Marcus absorbed them the way the desert absorbed rain, letting them soak in deep. "I'm not living here because of some noble sacrifice," he said finally. "I'm living here because I don't have anywhere else to go, and because despite everything, I'm not ready to give up completely. Maybe that makes me stubborn or stupid or crazy, but it's the truth." Autumn's face crumpled slightly, her teenage armor cracking. Everyone at school knows. They call you the caveman. They make jokes. Do you know what that's like?" "Yeah," Marcus said softly. "I do. I hear what people say in town. I know what they think of me." "Then why don't you just leave? Go somewhere else, start over, let me have a normal life." Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the pain she carried. The embarrassment, the confusion, the anger at having a father who was the town joke. He wanted to tell her that life was more complicated than normal and abnormal, that sometimes circumstances trapped you in places you never intended to be. But she was 17. She didn't want philosophy. She wanted a dad who didn't live in a cave. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "I'm sorry my choices have made your life harder. That was never what I wanted." Autumn wiped at her eyes, angry at herself for crying. I know it's not your fault, not really. The company screwed you over. Mum says that, but it's been 5 years, Dad. 5 years. I know. They sat in uncomfortable silence until they heard Rebecca's horn honking from outside. The hour was up. Autumn stood quickly, eager to escape the awkwardness. I should go. Yeah, Marcus said, standing too. Thanks for coming, really. Autumn paused at the cave entrance, looked back at him. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something else, something more. But then she just nodded and walked quickly to the waiting car. Marcus stood at the entrance and watched the Toyota navigate back down the rough path. He raised his hand in a small wave, but Autumn was already looking at her phone, and Rebecca was focused on driving. Neither saw him. He stood there for a long time after the car disappeared, the desert wind picking up and carrying the scent of creosote and dust. The sun was higher now, the day heating up. He should go inside, get out of the direct light, conserve water by not sweating it all out. But he remained, staring at the empty path, feeling the weight of his daughter's words. Maybe she was right. Maybe he should leave, go somewhere else, let her have a life without his shadow over it. But where would he go? And who would he be if he gave up the one thing keeping him anchored? Being near the daughter he loved, even if she couldn't stand to be near him. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive, Marcus turned back into the cave. He had work to do, rocks to study, journals to update. The same routine that had sustained him for 5 years. The same routine that was either impressive persistence or pathetic stubbornness, depending on who you asked. That evening, Marcus decided he needed a break from his own thoughts. He did something he rarely did anymore. He walked into town for dinner at Vera's diner. He had a little money from selling some of the crafts he made from desert materials to tourists who occasionally passed through. It was enough for a meal and maybe a beer if Vera was feeling generous with her paws. The diner was half empty when he arrived just after 6. A couple of old-timers sat at the counter nursing coffee. A family with young kids occupied one booth, and in the back corner, a group of men in button-down shirts and khakis, clearly not locals, spread papers across a table while they ate. Vera's face brightened when Marcus walked in. "Well, look who decided to join civilization," she said warmly, grabbing a menu. "Sit anywhere you like, honey." Marcus chose a booth near the window, away from everyone else. He ordered the meatloaf special and a beer, then settled in to watch the desert darkness descend outside. The diner was warm, comfortable, almost aggressively normal. For a moment, he let himself pretend he was just a regular person having a regular meal. Then he heard the voices from the back corner. "The geological surveys are promising," one of the men was saying, voice carrying in the quiet diner. "This whole region has untapped mineral potential. The old-timers barely scratched the surface." "What about property acquisition?" another asked. "Who owns the land?" "Mix of private holdings and BLM land. We can work with both. The key is moving quietly before word gets out and prices spike." Marcus's trained ears picked up despite himself. Geological surveys, mineral potential. These were developers, mining scouts maybe, or investors looking to capitalize on overlooked resources. "What about that cave situation?" a third voice asked, followed by laughter. "Jerry, didn't you mention some guy actually lives in one of the formations?" More laughter. "Oh yeah, the caveman. Local legend. Some washed-up geologist who lost his mind and moved into the hills. Town joke, basically. He's sitting on potentially valuable land and doesn't even know it," the first voice said, amused. "Probably couldn't afford to do anything with it even if he did. Sad, really." "Is he a problem for acquisition?" "Nah, he's squatting on public land anyway. When we're ready to move, we'll just get the county to clear him out. Shouldn't be hard." "Too easy money and local idiots," someone said, raising a glass. The sound of clinking glasses and self-satisfied laughter filled the diner. Marcus sat very still, his beer halfway to his lips. His heart had started beating faster, that old familiar rhythm of professional instinct triggering. They were talking about his cave, his land, his home. But more than that, they were talking about something his trained mind had suspected for years but never had the resources to investigate. Mineral potential. Untapped resources. The old-timers barely scratched the surface. He thought about the sealed passage at the back of the cave, the deliberate collapse, the way the rock formations in the area had always struck him as geologically significant. The old mining claims he'd researched when he first moved in, finding records from the 1800s of operations that had stopped abruptly, mysteriously. His scientific mind began connecting dots, forming hypotheses. What if they were right? What if there was something there? What if he wasn't crazy after all? Vera brought his meatloaf, but Marcus barely tasted it. His mind was racing now, firing on cylinders that hadn't engaged fully in 5 years. He was a geologist, trained to read the earth, to see what others missed. And for 5 years, he'd been living on top of something he'd been too defeated, too focused on survival, to properly investigate. The men in the back corner eventually paid and left, never noticing the caveman sitting 3 booths away. Marcus finished his meal mechanically, thanked Vera, and walked out into the cool desert night. The walk back to the cave felt different. The familiar path seemed to pulse with possibility. When he reached the entrance, he didn't go inside immediately. Instead, he stood there, flashlight in hand, staring into the darkness. He'd been living here for 5 years. 5 years of being mocked, dismissed, treated like a failed joke. 5 years of telling himself he was surviving, maintaining his dignity, staying close to his daughter. But maybe, just maybe, he'd been sitting on something else entirely, something that could change everything. Marcus stepped into the cave, moving past his living area to the back wall. He shone his flashlight on the sealed passage, studying it with fresh eyes. The professional eyes of a geologist, not the weary eyes of a man just trying to get through another day. The rockfall that blocked the passage wasn't random. It was too uniform, too deliberately placed. Someone had sealed this intentionally, and not recently. The rocks showed age, oxidation patterns consistent with a century or more of settling. His pulse quickened. He had tools, he had time, he had knowledge most people in this town didn't possess, and now he had motivation burning in his chest like wildfire. Marcus set down his flashlight, pulled out his notebook, and began to sketch. Measurements of the sealed passage, notes on rock composition, hypotheses about what might lie beyond. The old habits flooded back, muscle memory of doing the work he'd loved before everything fell apart. Outside, the desert night stretched vast and quiet. Inside the cave, a geologist stared at a sealed passage and made a decision. It was time to stop surviving and start investigating. Maybe those developers were right about one thing. Maybe he had been sitting on something valuable all along. And maybe, just maybe, Marcus Dane was about to prove that the crazy caveman wasn't so crazy after all. Marcus woke before dawn the next morning, his body buzzing with an energy he hadn't felt in years. Not the desperate energy of survival, but the focused intensity of purpose. He made coffee, strong and black, and sat at the cave entrance watching the first light paint the desert hills in shades of gold and crimson. The sealed passage waited in the darkness behind him. He'd spent half the night planning his approach. This wasn't going to be some reckless treasure hunt. He was a geologist, trained in proper excavation techniques, and he was going to do this right. Document everything. Take no unnecessary risks. Treat it like the professional operation it deserved to be, even if he was a crew of one working in secret. By 6 in the morning, he'd gathered his tools and set up a work area near the sealed passage. Headlamp, check. Multiple flashlights with fresh batteries, check. Hammer and chisels of varying sizes, check. Rope for securing loose rocks, check. Camera for documentation, check. Notebook for observations, check. Water and energy bars because he had no idea how long this would take, check. Marcus stood before the rockfall that had blocked the passage for over a century and took a deep breath. Then he raised his hammer and began to work. The first day was painstaking. Each rock had to be examined before removal to ensure he wasn't destabilizing the entire formation. Marcus worked with the methodical patience of someone who understood that rushing underground was how people died. He documented each layer with photographs and sketches, noting the composition of the rocks, the oxidation patterns, the way they'd been deliberately stacked rather than randomly fallen. His initial assessment had been correct. This wasn't a natural collapse. Someone had sealed this passage intentionally, and they'd done it with care. The rocks fit together almost like a puzzle, designed to stay in place for a very long time. By the end of day 1, he'd removed roughly 3 feet of the barrier. His hands were scraped raw despite the work gloves, his back ached, and his shoulders burned. But when he shone his light through the gap he'd created, he could see darkness beyond. Empty space. The passage continued. He emerged from the cave after dark, heated a can of soup on his hot plate, and fell into his sleeping bag before 9. His body was exhausted, but his mind raced with possibilities. What was beyond that wall? Why had it been sealed? And why was there no record of it in any of the old mining documents he'd researched? Day 2 brought more of the same methodical work. Marcus rotated between chiseling, clearing debris, photographing, and documenting. He was now 5 feet into the barrier. The air coming through the gap was different from the main cave, cooler, with a mineral smell that made his pulse quicken. His trained nose detected moisture, which meant water sources, which meant the passage went deep. By late afternoon, he'd created an opening large enough to squeeze through. Marcus secured his headlamp, clipped a backup flashlight to his belt, and carefully maneuvered into the gap. He had to turn sideways, exhale completely to make his chest narrow enough, and then he was through. The passage beyond was natural, not carved by human hands. It sloped downward at a gentle angle, the ceiling low enough that Marcus had to hunch as he moved forward. The walls were rough limestone, pocked with small formations where water had carved patterns over millennia. His headlamp beam bounced off crystalline deposits, nothing remarkable yet, just common calcite formations. But the air told him something was ahead. He moved carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. The passage twisted left, then right, descended further. After about 50 feet, it opened enough for him to stand upright. Another 100 feet, and he reached a junction where the passage split into 3 directions. Marcus paused, examining each option. The left passage was narrow and seemed to close up quickly. The right showed signs of water damage and unstable rock. The center passage, though, had something the others didn't. Tool marks. Very old tool marks. Someone had been here before, had widened this passage manually. The cuts in the stone were crude but deliberate, made with hand tools from another era. Marcus's heart rate increased. He was on the right track. He followed the center passage, noting how it had been expanded in sections where the natural formation was too narrow. The work was old, more than a century, based on the oxidation and mineral buildup on the tool marks. Whoever had done this had wanted to access something deeper in the system. The passage began to descend more steeply. Marcus had to brace himself against the walls to avoid sliding. His headlamp revealed rope grooves worn into the rock at strategic points, evidence that whoever worked here had used climbing techniques to navigate safely. Then the passage opened into something larger. Marcus emerged into a space where his headlamp beam couldn't find the far walls or the ceiling. The temperature dropped noticeably. He was in a cavern, a significant one. He swept his light in a slow arc, trying to gauge the size. And then he saw it. The walls sparkled like someone had embedded 1,000,000 tiny mirrors in the stone. Crystalline formations, massive ones, jutted from the ceiling and walls. Amethyst clusters the size of small cars. Quartz pillars that looked like frozen waterfalls. The headlamp beam refracted through them, casting purple and clear light in every direction. Marcus had seen geode formations before. This was different. This was organized. No, not organized by nature, organized by humans. His light caught something that made him freeze. Wooden beams, ancient and partially rotted, forming support structures against one wall. Mining equipment, a rusted wheelbarrow, pickaxes, shovels, scattered like someone had dropped them mid-work and never returned, and crates. Dozens of wooden crates stacked in neat rows. Marcus's hands started to shake. He moved forward on legs that felt disconnected from his body. His boot struck something metal, a lantern, the kind that burned oil lying on its side. He picked it up. Still had oil in it, dried to residue after more than 100 years. The first crate he reached was stamped with faded letters. He knelt, brushed away layers of mineral dust and read, Copper Ridge Mining Company, 1873. 1873, 152 years ago. Marcus's breathing came faster. He found the edge of the crate lid, warped with age but still intact. He wedged his fingers under it and pulled. The wood cracked and gave way. Inside, wrapped in rotted cloth, were chunks of ore, but not copper ore. Marcus lifted one piece, held it under his headlamp. Gold, raw gold, the quality so high it glinted even under the grime of a century and a half. He lifted another piece. Same. A third. All gold, all incredibly pure. He set the sample down with shaking hands and moved to the next crate. This one's lid came off easier. Inside were smaller packages, wrapped in what had once been leather. He unwrapped one carefully. An emerald the size of his thumb, uncut, raw, but unmistakably genuine. He unwrapped another, a sapphire, another, a ruby. Minerals he could barely identify without proper testing, but his trained eye recognized value when he saw it. Marcus sat back hard, his back hitting another crate. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. This was impossible. Copper Ridge Mine had been exhausted by the 1880s, everyone knew that. The town existed because of that mine, and the town started dying when the ore ran out. That was historical fact, except it wasn't. He forced himself to stand, to think like a scientist instead of someone looking at a fortune. He began a methodical survey of the cavern, documenting everything with his camera. The flash illuminated the space in bursts, revealing more details with each shot, more crates, at least 30 of them, more equipment, a makeshift desk made from boards and rocks, and on that desk, preserved by the dry cave air, a leather-bound journal. Marcus approached it like it might disintegrate at his touch. The leather was cracked and stained, but intact. He opened it carefully. The pages were brittle, the ink faded but legible. Handwriting in the elaborate style of the 19th century filled the pages. He flipped to the first entry, May 3rd, 1873. We have broken through to the lower chamber. What we have found defies all expectations. The main vein continues far beyond our initial surveys. Copper, yes, but also gold in quantities I have never witnessed. And the crystalline formations, unlike anything documented in geological texts. We are rich men, all of us. This discovery will make Copper Ridge the wealthiest town in the territory. Marcus flipped forward, skimming entries that detailed weeks of mining, of carefully extracting and cataloguing the wealth they'd found. The excitement in the prose was palpable even across a century and a half. Then the tone changed. June 18th, 1873. The ceiling shows signs of instability. We have consulted with the surveyor, who advises we cease operations immediately. The rock formations are fractured in ways that make further excavation dangerous. Some of the men wish to continue. The wealth is beyond measure. But Matthews is right. Our lives are worth more than gold. June 20th, 1873. There was a collapse today in the eastern shaft. 2 men injured, 1 seriously. We have voted to seal the lower chamber until proper supports can be engineered. Everything we have extracted is secured in crates. We will return when it is safe. The next entry was written in a different, shakier hand. July 2nd, 1873. Matthews is dead from his injuries. The eastern shaft has fully collapsed. The owners have ordered the entire operation shut down until the safety of the structure can be assessed by engineers from San Francisco. We have sealed the passage to the lower chamber. Only the 5 of us know the full extent of what lies within. We have sworn to keep this knowledge secret until the situation can be properly addressed. The wealth will wait. It has waited millions of years. It can wait a few more months. That was the final entry. Marcus flipped through the remaining pages, all blank. They never came back. Whatever happened, bankruptcy, another disaster, death, relocation, the 5 men who knew about the lower chamber never returned, and their secret died with them. The mine continued operating for another decade, he knew from his research, extracting the more accessible copper and modest amounts of gold from the upper shafts. But this chamber, sealed and forgotten, sat untouched for over 150 years, until now. Marcus sat in the darkness, surrounded by a fortune that defied calculation, and tried to make his brain work. He needed to think clearly, scientifically. He pulled out his notebook and began taking notes, forcing himself into professional mode. Based on what he could see, assuming the crates contained similar quantities and qualities of minerals, and using conservative estimates of current market values, he was looking at somewhere between $200 million and $400 million worth of raw materials. He wrote that number, stared at it, crossed it out, recalculated. Even being extremely conservative, accounting for extraction costs, processing, market fluctuations, the total value was staggering. $300 million felt like the safest estimate. $300 million, sitting beneath a cave he'd been living in for 5 years while people called him crazy. Marcus started to laugh. It came out shaky, almost hysterical. He pressed his hands to his face, trying to regain composure. This was real. This was happening. He was sitting in an undiscovered fortune that could change everything. His life, Autumn's future, the entire town of Copper Ridge. But then the complications hit him like falling rocks. Who owned this? Legally, officially, who had claim to these minerals? The land was technically Bureau of Land Management property, which meant federal government. But there were old mining claims on file from the 19th century. Were any still valid? Had they ever been properly closed? What about the descendants of the original Copper Ridge Mining Company, assuming the company still existed in some form? And even if he could establish some kind of legal claim, what then? The moment this discovery became public, his life would become chaos. Mining corporations with teams of lawyers would descend. Treasure hunters, media, the government. Everyone would want a piece, and Marcus had no resources to fight them. He couldn't afford a lawyer. He had maybe $300 in cash to his name. He lived in a cave, for God's sake. How was he supposed to navigate the legal complexities of a $300 million mineral deposit? And there was another problem. If this became public, and it turned out he had no legal claim, he'd be evicted from the cave. The one place he had to live would be seized, fenced off, and he'd be left with nothing. Again. Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly. Panic wouldn't help. He needed to be smart, careful, strategic. First step, document everything thoroughly before taking any other action. He spent the next 2 hours photographing every crate, every piece of equipment, every angle of the cavern. He took detailed notes on mineral compositions, approximate quantities, the structural integrity of the space. He carefully placed samples from different crates into labeled bags. Second step, secure the site. When he finally made his way back through the passage to his cave, it was after midnight. He was exhausted, filthy, and his mind was spinning. But he took the time to carefully reconstruct the barrier at the passage entrance, making it look as undisturbed as possible from the outside. He couldn't risk anyone accidentally discovering what he'd found before he figured out his next move. He emerged into the main cave, stripped off his dust-covered clothes, and washed using the last of his clean water. Then he sat at his makeshift desk and continued documenting, transferring his handwritten notes into more detailed observations while everything was fresh in his mind. Dawn was breaking when he finally allowed himself to lie down. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept returning to the cavern, to the crates, to that journal, to the possibility that everything could change, or the possibility that it could all be taken away. The next 3 days passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Marcus went through the motions of normal life, walking into town for water, accepting food from Vera, nodding at the few people who bothered to acknowledge his existence. But inside, he was a coiled spring of tension and possibility. At night, he pored over the photos on his camera, studying them until his eyes burned. He researched old mining claims on the ancient laptop he kept charged via solar panel, using the spotty internet connection he could sometimes pick up from a distant cell tower. He made lists of people he might be able to trust, then crossed most of them off. He needed help, professional help, legal help. But who could he trust with information this explosive? Saturday arrived, and with it, Autumn's weekly visit. Marcus heard Rebecca's car before he saw it, the engine sound distinct in the desert silence. He'd been so absorbed in his research that he'd almost forgotten what day it was. He quickly closed his laptop, shoved his notes into a sealed container, and tried to make himself look normal. Whatever normal looked like for a man sitting on a $300 million secret. Autumn walked up to the cave entrance, and Marcus could tell immediately she wasn't in a good mood. Her shoulders were tight, her expression guarded. She wore her sunglasses even though it was overcast. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice light. "Hey," Autumn replied flatly. She stepped into the cave, looked around like she was cataloguing all the ways this wasn't a normal home, and sighed. "Mom wants me to ask if you need anything, like supplies or whatever." "I'm good," Marcus said. "Tell her thanks." Autumn nodded, then actually looked at him. Really looked. Her eyebrows drew together. "Dad, are you okay? You look weird." "Weird how?" "I don't know, like intense. Have you been sleeping?" She stepped closer. "And why are your hands all torn up?" Marcus glanced down at his hands, which were covered in scrapes and bruises from moving rocks. "Just been doing some repairs around the cave, maintenance stuff." "Uh-huh." Autumn didn't sound convinced. She walked further into the cave, and Marcus felt his pulse spike. His research notes were poorly hidden. The sample bags were in plain sight if she looked at his desk area. The camera was sitting out with hundreds of photos of a fortune on its memory card. "So, how's school?" he asked, trying to redirect her attention. "School sucks," Autumn said. She picked up one of his geological journals, flipped through it without interest. "We had this assembly about future planning. They brought in guest speakers to talk about their careers, successful people with houses and cars and normal jobs. The emphasis on normal wasn't subtle." "That sounds useful," Marcus said carefully. "Yeah, well, at lunch everyone was talking about it, and Sarah Peterson, you know, her dad owns the hardware store, she asks me what my dad does." Autumn's voice was tight. "And I said you were a geologist. And she laughed, said, 'Isn't he the cave guy? My dad says he's crazy.'" Marcus felt the familiar ache in his chest. "Autumn. And I tried to explain that you used to be a real geologist, that you worked for a big company, that you're not just some homeless weirdo, but everyone was looking at me like I was pathetic for defending you." She threw the journal down harder than necessary. "Do you know how embarrassing that is? Everyone asks why my dad lives in a cave. What am I supposed to say?" "Tell them I'm surviving the only way I know how," Marcus said quietly. "That's not good enough." Autumn's voice rose. "I'm 17, Dad. I have to go to school every day and pretend I don't care that my father is the town joke. Dale's been talking about colleges, about maybe helping me with tuition. And you know what that means? It means he gets to be the dad who actually helps me with my future while you live in a cave and study rocks that don't matter to anyone." Each word landed like a physical blow. Marcus wanted to tell her everything, about the discovery, about the fortune, about how everything might change. But the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until he knew if any of it was real in a way that mattered. "I know this is hard," he started. "Hard? Dad, it's humiliating. My friends' parents are teachers and shop owners and normal people. Mine is a caveman who smells like dirt and can't even afford to take me to dinner." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, because what else could he say? "I never wanted this life to be your burden." Autumn's anger cracked, revealing the hurt underneath. "Then why don't you do something about it? Anything. Just stop living like this and be normal." There was that word again. Normal. Marcus looked at his daughter, 17 and angry and embarrassed and hurt, and he wanted more than anything to fix it, to fix everything. But he couldn't, not yet. "I'm working on something," he said before he could stop himself. Autumn's expression shifted to suspicion. "What does that mean?" "Nothing. Forget it. Just, I'm trying. I know it doesn't look like much, but I haven't given up." "You've been saying that for 5 years." "I know." Autumn stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw his ex-wife in her features, the same frustration, the same disappointment. Then she pulled out her phone, checking the time. "I should go. Mom's probably waiting." "Already? You just got here." "I told her I'd make it quick. I have homework and I'm meeting friends later." The lie was obvious in her tone. She just wanted to leave. Marcus walked her to the entrance. Rebecca's car was visible down the path, engine running. Autumn paused before leaving, not looking at him. "You know what Dale said the other night?" she asked. "He said people in this town respect him because he builds things, makes things better. He asked what you've built in the last 5 years besides excuses." The words were meant to wound, and they succeeded. Marcus swallowed hard. "Your stepdad doesn't know everything. He knows you live in a cave." With that, Autumn walked quickly down the path. Marcus watched her go, watched the car door slam, watched them drive away. He stood there long after the vehicle disappeared, the desert wind picking up and carrying dust devils across the empty landscape. He looked down at his scraped, bruised hands. Hands that had moved hundreds of pounds of rock. Hands that had uncovered a fortune. Hands that could give his daughter everything: education, opportunities, respect, if only he could figure out how to claim it. Marcus turned back to the cave, to the sealed passage that held his secret. Dale Morrison asked what he'd built in 5 years. Maybe it was time to show them all. What happens next will turn this town upside down and change Marcus's life forever. Stay tuned. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. That evening, Marcus sat at his desk with his ancient laptop and went through his old email contacts. Most were defunct, addresses from a life that ended 5 years ago, from colleagues who'd moved on or stopped responding. But there was one name he kept circling back to: Dr. Helen Voss. Helen had been a mineralogist at the university where Marcus did his graduate work. They'd collaborated on several projects before he went corporate, and she stayed academic. More importantly, she'd been one of maybe 3 people who publicly defended him after the Silverton disaster. She'd written a paper analyzing his reports, demonstrating that his concerns had been valid and that the collapse wasn't due to his negligence, but corporate pressure to ignore safety issues. It had cost her professionally. Apex Mining had influence in academic circles, and Helen's defense of Marcus made her unpopular with industry-funded departments. But she'd done it anyway. Marcus hadn't spoken to her in over 2 years, didn't even know if this email address still worked. But he typed out a message, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. How did you reach out to someone after years of silence to ask for help with something that sounded completely insane? Finally, he settled on simple truth. "Helen, it's Marcus Dane. I know it's been a long time. I'm living in Copper Ridge, Arizona now, and I've discovered something that requires your expertise. I can't explain via email, but if you're willing to meet, I promise it will be worth your time. This isn't a favor request. This is a significant geological find. Please let me know if you're interested. Marcus." He hit send before he could overthink it, then stared at the screen like a response might materialize instantly. Of course, nothing happened. Email didn't work that way, especially not at 11 at night. Marcus closed the laptop and lay down, but sleep remained elusive. His mind kept running through scenarios. What if Helen didn't respond? What if she thought he was crazy? What if she responded but wanted nothing to do with whatever mess he'd gotten himself into? And lurking beneath all those questions was a deeper fear. What if this discovery destroyed his life as thoroughly as the Silverton disaster had? The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of voices outside his cave. Male voices, rough and already loud despite the early hour. He recognized them immediately, and his stomach sank. Brett Holloway and his crew. Marcus stood quickly, pulled on boots and a shirt, and stepped outside. 3 pickup trucks were parked at angles across the path. Brett leaned against his, arms crossed, while his 2 friends, Ray and Tony, stood nearby with the aggressive posture of men looking for trouble. "Morning, caveman," Brett called out. "Nice day for it, isn't it?" "For what?" Marcus asked flatly. "For working," Brett said, pushing off his truck and walking closer. "You've been real busy lately. Heard you from the road 2 nights ago. Lots of banging and scraping. What are you building in there? A bedroom for all the bats?" Ray and Tony laughed. Marcus kept his expression neutral. Just maintenance. The cave needs upkeep, same as any structure. Maintenance. Brett drew out the word mockingly. That's funny because Ray here has been doing some rock climbing in these hills. Said he noticed fresh excavation dust near your entrance. Lots of it. More than just maintenance would make. Marcus's pulse quickened, but he didn't let it show. Like I said, upkeep. The passage needed clearing. What passage? Brett took another step closer. His breath smelled like beer, even though it was barely 8 in the morning. You hiding something in there, old man? Maybe you found some arrowheads or old bottles, some tourist shit you can sell.
I'm not hiding anything.
Then you won't mind if we take a look. Brett moved toward the cave entrance. Marcus stepped to block him. Actually, I do mind. This is my home, and you're trespassing. Brett's expression hardened. Your home? This ain't your home. This is public land. You're a squatter, which means you got no rights. I've been here 5 years without issue. That establishes residency. Residency? Brett laughed. You think living in a hole like an animal establishes anything? Sheriff Wilkins could evict you tomorrow if he wanted to. Then let the sheriff handle it. You need to leave. For a moment, tension hung thick in the desert air. Brett was younger, bigger, and had backup. Marcus was alone and aware of how badly this could go. But he also couldn't let them into the cave, couldn't risk them seeing the freshly moved rocks, the equipment he'd been using, any sign of what lay beyond that sealed passage. Finally, Brett stepped back, but his eyes were calculating. You're acting real protective for someone with nothing to hide. Makes a man wonder. Wonder somewhere else. Brett studied him for another long moment, then turned to his friends. Come on, we'll let the caveman keep his secrets, for now. The 3 of them climbed into their trucks, engines roaring to life. But before driving away, Brett leaned out his window. You know what I think? I think you found something. And I think you're too stupid to know what to do with it. Then they were gone, trucks kicking up dust as they navigated the rough path back to the main road. Marcus stood at the cave entrance long after they disappeared, his hands clenched into fists. That was bad. Brett was the kind of guy who acted on suspicion, who let greed override common sense. If he thought there was something valuable in the cave, he'd be back. And next time he might bring more than just 2 friends. Marcus needed to move faster. The window for keeping this secret was closing. He went back inside and checked his laptop, more out of desperation than expectation. His email inbox showed one new message, from Helen Voss. His hands shook as he opened it. Marcus, I won't pretend I'm not surprised to hear from you. I'm at a conference in Flagstaff this week. Could meet you Wednesday afternoon if you're serious. There's a truck stop diner at the junction of Highway 89 and Route 64. 2 p.m.? If you're wasting my time, this will be the last conversation we ever have. But if you've actually found something significant, I'm listening. Helen! Marcus read it 3 times. Wednesday. That was 2 days away. 2 days to prepare, to organize his evidence, to figure out how to present this without sounding completely insane. He could do that. He had to do that, because the clock was ticking, and Marcus Dane had just gone from being the town joke to being someone sitting on the discovery of a lifetime with no idea how to protect it. Helen had been better than good. The mineralogist had taken one look at Marcus's samples, listened to his story with increasing intensity, and made 3 phone calls before their coffee got cold. By the time they left the truck stop diner, she'd connected him with a mineral rights attorney named Patricia Chen, who specialized in historical mining claims. Patricia worked fast. Within 72 hours, she'd filed preliminary claim paperwork with the county, citing discovery of previously undocumented mineral deposits on land subject to expired 19th century mining rights. It was complex legal maneuvering, building a case that would take months to fully establish, but it was a start. A foothold. Marcus had felt hope for the first time in years. That hope lasted exactly 4 days. The problem started, as most problems in small towns do, with loose lips and bored people. The county clerk who processed the claim paperwork was a man named Donald Reeves, 58 years old, who'd worked the same desk for 31 years. Filing claims was routine, boring work. But this one caught his attention. Marcus Dane, the caveman everyone made fun of, filing a mineral rights claim for potentially significant deposits. Donald mentioned it to his wife Carol that evening over meatloaf. Just idle conversation, no malice intended. Carol, who taught 3rd grade and attended book club every Thursday, found it fascinating. The cave guy found something? Really? She mentioned it at book club, swearing everyone to secrecy, which in a small town means absolutely nothing. By Friday afternoon, half of Copper Ridge knew some version of the story. By Saturday, everyone knew. And with each retelling, the story morphed, grew, became something bigger and wilder than the truth. Did you hear? That crazy guy in the cave found gold. I heard it was Spanish treasure, buried by conquistadors. My cousin says there's millions down there, actual millions. Government's been covering it up for years, probably why they let him squat there to guard it. The whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into speculation. Speculation turned into something darker, desire. Marcus first realized something had changed when he walked into Vera's diner on Monday morning and the entire place went quiet. Every head turned. People stared at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion to something that looked uncomfortably like greed. "Morning, Marcus," Vera said carefully, pouring his coffee with hands that seemed shakier than usual. "Heard you've had some excitement." "News travels fast," Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral. "In this town, faster than wildfire." Vera leaned in, lowering her voice. "People are talking a lot. You need to be careful." "I'm always careful." "No, I mean really careful. There are folks getting ideas, stupid ideas, but dangerous ones." Marcus paid for his coffee and left quickly, feeling eyes following him out the door. The walk back to the cave felt different, exposed, like the landscape itself had turned hostile. When he reached the path leading up to his home, he stopped. Fresh tire tracks. Multiple vehicles had been here recently. His pulse quickened as he climbed faster, rounding the final turn to see his cave entrance. The tarp that usually covered it hung in shreds. His solar panels were smashed, and wandering the hillside around the cave were 3 people with metal detectors, sweeping methodically across the desert floor. "Hey!" Marcus shouted, breaking into a run. "This is private property. Get out!" One of the treasure hunters, a man in his 40s wearing a vest covered in pockets, looked up. "This is BLM land, friend. Public access." "I live here. You're trespassing." "You're squatting. Different thing." The man went back to his metal detector. The other 2 didn't even acknowledge Marcus. Rage flooded through him, but Marcus forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't fight 3 people. Instead, he pushed past them into the cave, his heart sinking with each step. His living area had been ransacked, the sleeping bag torn open, contents of his storage bins scattered, his desk overturned, papers everywhere. Someone had gone through everything, looking for what? Maps, evidence, the location of the sealed passage? Marcus rushed to the back of the cave. The barrier he'd carefully reconstructed looked intact, but some of the rocks had been moved, tested. Someone had been trying to get through. His sample bags were gone, the ones containing gold ore and gemstones he'd been planning to show Patricia as evidence. Gone. Stolen. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wilkins arrived 40 minutes later, by which time the treasure hunters had moved further up the hillside. The sheriff was a tired-looking man in his mid-50s who walked with a slight limp from an old injury. He surveyed the damage with an expression that suggested he'd expected this. "Marcus," he said, not unkindly, "I need you to file a formal report." "I need protection," Marcus said. "People are coming onto my property, destroying my things, stealing from me." "The property issue is complicated. I've lived here 5 years. That establishes residency." "In theory, yes. In practice?" Wilkins shook his head. "This is federal land. You're in a gray area, and with this mineral claim you filed, you've made yourself a target." So what am I supposed to do? Let people rob me? I can increase patrols in the area, stop by a few times a day. But Marcus, I've got one deputy for this entire district. I can't station someone at your cave 24/7. You need to consider your options here. My options? This is my home. This is my discovery. Wilkins's expression softened. I know, and I'm sympathetic. I really am. But you need to understand what you're up against. Once word spread about what you found, this became bigger than you. File the report. Document everything that was stolen. I'll do what I can, but you need to be smart about this. The sheriff left, and Marcus sat in the ruins of his home, feeling the walls closing in. He couldn't protect this place alone. He couldn't protect the discovery. And he couldn't protect himself. That night, exhausted and defeated, Marcus barely slept. Every sound outside made him jerk awake, wondering if someone was trying to break in again. By dawn, he looked like a man who'd aged a decade overnight. His phone buzzed around 8 in the morning. Autumn. Dad, I need to talk to you. Can I come by? Now's not a great time. Dad, I'm already on my way. She hung up before he could respond. Autumn arrived 20 minutes later, but she didn't come alone. Rebecca was with her, and both of them looked agitated. Autumn pushed past Marcus into the cave, then stopped, staring at the destruction. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Dad, what happened?" "Some people decided to help themselves," Marcus said tiredly. Rebecca stood at the entrance, arms crossed. "Marcus, everyone in town is talking. Everyone. The story at Autumn's school is that you found buried treasure worth millions. Kids are asking her if she's going to be rich now." Autumn turned to face him, eyes wide. "Dad, is it true? Did you really find something?" Marcus looked at his daughter, at the hope and fear warring in her expression, and made a decision. She deserved the truth. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's real. It's an old mining cache from the 1800s. Gold, gemstones, minerals, worth a lot of money, potentially life-changing amounts." Autumn's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God." "But it's complicated," Marcus continued. "The legal ownership is unclear. I filed a claim, but that doesn't mean I'll get to keep it. And now that word's out, everyone wants a piece." "How much?" Rebecca asked. "How much are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate? $300 million. Rebecca actually stumbled backward. Autumn made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. $300 million, Autumn repeated. "Dad, that's insane." "It's also a problem," Marcus said, "because I can't prove ownership yet, and people are already trying to steal it. Someone broke in here yesterday and took evidence I needed. Treasure hunters are combing the hillside, and it's only going to get worse." Autumn looked around the destroyed cave, then back at her father. For the first time, Marcus saw something change in her expression. The embarrassment was gone, replaced by something fiercer. Protection. "Does this mean we could have a normal life?" she asked quietly. "If you can claim it legally, could you get a house again? Could things be different?" "Maybe," Marcus said, "if we survive this. If I can hold on long enough to establish legal rights. If corporations and treasure hunters and half the town don't take it first." Autumn straightened her shoulders. "Then I'm staying. I'm helping you protect it." "Autumn, no." "Dad, I'm 17, not 7. You can't do this alone, and you shouldn't have to." She looked at her mother. "Mom, tell him." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, emotions playing across her face that Marcus hadn't seen in years. Finally, she spoke. "Marcus, you need better help than what Autumn and I can provide. You need security, lawyers, people who understand how to handle this. I have a lawyer. Helen connected me." "You need more than one lawyer," Rebecca interrupted. "Dale knows people. Real estate, property law, contracts. He could help." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Dale. I know you two don't get along, but he's got resources you need. He's also got his own interests. You think he'd help me out of the goodness of his heart?" Rebecca's expression hardened. "You're so damn stubborn. Someone offers help and you assume they're trying to take advantage." "Because they usually are." Not everyone is out to get you, Marcus. Really? Because yesterday someone broke into my home and stole from me. Today there are people with metal detectors treating this place like a public treasure hunt. You tell me I'm paranoid, Rebecca, but maybe I'm just realistic. They stared at each other, years of unresolved conflict crackling in the air between them. Autumn stepped between them. "Stop," she said firmly. "Both of you. Fighting doesn't help." She turned to her mother. "If Dale wants to help, he can prove it by not asking for anything in return. Can you make that happen?" Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "I can talk to him." "And Dad," Autumn continued, turning to Marcus, "you have to accept help when it's offered, even if it comes from people you don't like. Deal?" Marcus looked at his daughter, no longer the embarrassed teenager, but someone stepping into her own strength, and felt pride cut through the exhaustion. Deal. Rebecca left to talk to Dale, but Autumn stayed. She helped Marcus clean up the destroyed living space, organize what was left, and barricade the entrance better. They worked in companionable silence, a team for the first time in years. Around noon, a vehicle approached, expensive-sounding engine, moving slowly up the rough path. Marcus stepped outside to see a black SUV with tinted windows. Behind it, 2 more identical vehicles. His stomach dropped. The doors opened and 4 people emerged. 3 men in business casual and 1 woman in a sharp grey suit. They moved with the confidence of people used to getting what they wanted. The woman approached first, extending a hand Marcus didn't shake. "Mr. Dane, I'm Jennifer Caldwell, legal counsel for Apex Mining Corporation." The blood drained from Marcus's face. Apex, his old employer, the company that had destroyed his career. "We have no business," Marcus said coldly. "I think we do," Jennifer replied smoothly. She nodded to one of the men, who opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We've reviewed your claim filing. Interesting discovery. We've also reviewed historical records and found that the land you're currently occupying falls within the boundaries of an original mining claim filed by Copper Ridge Mining Company in 1868. That company was acquired by Western Territorial Extraction in 1903, which was subsequently absorbed by Apex Mining in 1957. She pulled out a document, yellowed with age, covered in elaborate 19th century script and stamps. "This is the original claim. Still legally valid under territorial mining law that was grandfathered into statehood provisions. Which means, Mr. Dane, that anything you've discovered on this land belongs to Apex." Marcus's world tilted. "That claim is over 150 years old. There's no way it's still active." "Mineral rights don't expire the way you might think," Jennifer said, "especially when properly maintained through corporate succession. We've had lawyers review this thoroughly. Our claim is solid." "Then why are you here?" Marcus demanded. "If you already own it, why bother talking to me?" Jennifer's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Because litigation is expensive and time-consuming. We'd rather resolve this cleanly. We're prepared to offer you a finder's fee, $5 million. You sign over any claim to the discovery, provide us with documentation of what you found, and walk away. Clean break, no lawsuits, no drawn-out legal battle you can't afford to fight. $5 million. A year ago, even a month ago, that would have seemed like an impossible fortune. But Marcus had seen what was in that cavern. He'd done the calculations. "The deposit is worth $300 million, he said. "You know it, I know it. $5 million is insulting." $5 million is more than nothing, which is what you'll have after 5 years of legal fees fighting a case you cannot win, Jennifer countered. "Think about your daughter, Mr. Dane. Think about giving her a stable future instead of dragging her through a court battle that will destroy whatever relationship you have left." The mention of Autumn made rage surge through him. "You don't get to talk about my daughter." "We're trying to be reasonable. Reasonable would be acknowledging that I discovered something your company missed for over 100 years because you were too incompetent to properly survey your own claims. Reasonable would be offering a fair percentage, not pocket change compared to the actual value. This is extortion dressed up as negotiation." Jennifer's expression hardened. "You have 48 hours to accept our offer. After that, we file injunctions, freeze your claim, and begin litigation that will bury you. I've reviewed your financial situation, Mr. Dane. You can't afford lawyers who could fight us. You'll lose everything, including that cave you call home. Take the $5 million. It's the smartest decision you'll ever make. She turned and walked back to the SUV. The convoy departed, leaving Marcus standing in a cloud of dust and fury. Autumn appeared beside him. "Dad, what just happened?" "They're trying to steal it," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "The company that destroyed my career 5 years ago is trying to steal my discovery." "Can they do that?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." He turned to his daughter. "But I'll be damned if I let them do it without a fight." The town hall meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Word had spread fast that Marcus would be making a statement about the discovery, and everyone wanted to hear it. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity, people standing along the walls, craning to see. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at faces he'd seen around town for 5 years. Faces that had mocked him, ignored him, pitied him. Now they stared with hungry curiosity. Sheriff Wilkins called the meeting to order. "Mr. Dane has requested time to address the community regarding recent events. Please give him your attention." Marcus cleared his throat. His hands gripped the podium edge so hard his knuckles went white. "5 years ago, I came to Copper Ridge with nothing," he began. "No job, no home, no prospects. I found a cave and made it my home because I had nowhere else to go. And for 5 years, you've called me crazy. Called me the caveman, the hermit, the town joke. Some of you threw trash near my home. Most of you pretended I didn't exist." The room was dead silent. "Now I've discovered something valuable on that land. Something that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And suddenly, everyone cares. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone thinks they have a right to it." His voice grew stronger. "But I earned this. Through 5 years of humiliation, through survival, through refusing to give up when everyone said I should. I lived in that cave while you laughed. I studied those rocks while you mocked, and I found what no one else bothered to look for." Some people nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. "The wealth under that land is mine by right of discovery, and I'm prepared to fight anyone who tries to take it." "That wealth belongs to Copper Ridge," someone shouted from the back. Marcus recognized the voice, Tom Henderson, whose family had owned the hardware store for 3 generations. "That mine was ours, our history. You're just a squatter who got lucky." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Lucky?" Marcus's voice rose. "I applied 15 years of geological training to find it. That's not luck, that's expertise." "Expertise?" Another voice, this one from Dale Morrison, standing near the side wall with Rebecca beside him. "You're the geologist who cost Apex Mining hundreds of millions. Some expert." The comment landed like a bomb. People muttered, remembered. Marcus felt old shame try to surface, but he pushed it down. "I was blamed for corporate negligence," Marcus said firmly. "My reports warned them. They ignored me. The collapse wasn't my fault, but they needed a scapegoat. And now that same company is trying to steal my discovery using century-old mining claims." "Maybe they have a right to it," someone called out. "Maybe you don't," someone else countered. "He found it, it's his." The room erupted into arguing. Sheriff Wilkins had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. But before calm could settle, Brett Holloway stood up in the middle of the room. "You don't deserve any of it," Brett said loudly. "You're nothing but a thief and a fraud. You've been squatting illegally, and now you want to profit off land that doesn't belong to you. That's called stealing." "I'm not stealing anything." "You're stealing from this town. That mine, that history, those minerals, they should benefit Copper Ridge, not some washed-up failure living in a hole." Several people applauded. Others booed. The room descended into chaos, people shouting over each other, old grievances and new greed boiling over. Sheriff Wilkins stood, his hand moving toward his belt. "Everyone calm down," he commanded. "This is a public forum, not a brawl." But the damage was done. The town had split. Half thought Marcus deserved his discovery. The other half thought it belonged to the community, to history, to anyone but him. And sitting in the middle of that divide was a fortune that would destroy relationships, breed resentment, and turn neighbor against neighbor. Marcus left the meeting early, pushing through the crowd with Autumn close behind. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. They walked quickly to Rebecca's car. "That went well," Autumn said sarcastically. "About as expected," Marcus replied. "Half those people hate you." "They hated me before. At least now they have a better reason." They drove in silence back to the cave, but as they approached, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Flashlights. Multiple flashlights moving around the cave entrance in the darkness. "Stop the car," he said urgently. "Dad, stop the car!" Autumn pulled over. Marcus was out before it fully stopped, running toward the cave. He could see them now, 5 or 6 figures in the darkness, wearing bandanas over their faces, carrying tools. They'd blocked the entrance with their vehicles and were trying to force their way into the sealed passage. "Get away from there!" Marcus shouted. The figures turned. One of them was Brett. Marcus recognized his build, his stance. The others were his crew, plus a few more he didn't recognize. "We're just claiming what should belong to the town," Brett called out. "Public property, public treasure." "This is breaking and entering. Autumn, call 911. Brett laughed. "By the time the sheriff gets here, we'll have what we came for." Marcus rushed forward, but 2 of the men blocked him, shoving him back. He heard Autumn screaming into her phone, giving the address, begging the dispatcher to hurry. Marcus tried to push past again, and this time someone hit him, a solid punch to the jaw that sent him sprawling. "Dad!" Autumn ran toward him, but Marcus waved her back. "Stay in the car! Lock the doors!" The masked men were inside the cave now, their lights visible in the darkness. Marcus could hear them attacking the sealed passage with pickaxes and crowbars, smashing through the careful reconstruction he'd done. They were going to get through. They were going to find the chamber, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The masked men heard them too and quickened their pace, smashing harder, faster. Then someone shouted. They'd broken through. "There's a passage, a tunnel. There's something back here." Brett's voice was triumphant. "I knew it! Get in there! Grab whatever you can!" But the sirens were upon them now. Sheriff Wilkins's patrol car and a deputy's vehicle roared up the path, lights blazing. The masked men scattered like roaches, running for their vehicles. Brett was the last to emerge from the cave, and he made eye contact with Marcus as he ran. "This isn't over," he shouted. The sheriff and deputy chased them, but in the darkness and rough terrain, most escaped. Only Brett was caught, tackled by the deputy as he tried to reach his truck. Handcuffs clicked in the night. Marcus stood slowly, his jaw throbbing where he'd been hit. The cave entrance gaped open, the barrier destroyed. Anyone could walk right into that passage now. The secret was exposed. Sheriff Wilkins approached, breathing hard. "You all right?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "No, I'm really not." Autumn ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, you're bleeding." Marcus touched his split lip and winced. I'm okay. But he wasn't. The cave was compromised. The discovery was exposed. Brett would be processed and probably out on bail by morning, and Marcus was standing in the ruins of his last defense knowing he'd lost. He couldn't protect it anymore. He couldn't protect himself, and he had no idea what came next. The morning after the attack, Marcus sat on a folding chair outside his violated cave, staring at nothing. His jaw was purple with bruising, his lip still swollen. Autumn had stayed with him through the night, refusing to leave despite Rebecca's phone calls insisting she come home. Now, as the sun climbed higher, casting harsh light across the desert, Helen's rental car appeared on the path. She emerged quickly, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. "Marcus, I came as soon as I heard." She looked at the destroyed entrance, the police tape still fluttering in the breeze, and her expression hardened. "This has gotten completely out of control." "Tell me something I don't know," Marcus said flatly. Helen pulled up another chair, sat beside him. Autumn hovered near the cave entrance, arms wrapped around herself. Helen looked between them, then spoke with the directness of someone who'd made a decision. "We can't fight this quietly anymore," she said. "Corporations, treasure hunters, half the town against you. Marcus, you're trying to hold back a flood with your bare hands. It's not working." "What choice do I have?"
Go public, national media. Make this story so big, so visible, that it becomes impossible for them to steal it quietly.
Marcus shook his head. "More exposure means more danger, more people coming after it." "It also means accountability," Helen countered. "Right now, Apex can pressure you behind closed doors. Brett and his crew can attack you and claim they were just defending town interests. But put cameras on this, make you a national story? Suddenly everyone has to play by the rules because the whole country is watching." "She's right, Dad," Autumn said quietly. Both adults turned to look at her. She stepped closer, her teenage uncertainty replaced by conviction. "You've been invisible your whole life. The company made you invisible when they blamed you. This town made you invisible when they mocked you. Even I made you invisible because I was embarrassed." Her voice cracked. "Maybe it's time people finally see you, really see you." Marcus looked at his daughter, this young woman who'd grown brave overnight, and felt something shift in his chest. Fear still lived there, exhaustion too, but under it all was a spark of the man he used to be. The geologist who stood by his findings, even when executives told him he was wrong. The scientist who trusted evidence over politics. "Okay," he said. "Okay, let's do it." Helen pulled out her phone immediately. "I know someone. Investigative journalist, works for a major national outlet. She specializes in underdog stories, corporate corruption, David versus Goliath situations. Her name is Sandra Morales, and she doesn't back down from anyone." 20 minutes later, Helen had made the call. By evening, Sandra was on a plane to Arizona. The story broke 3 days later on a Tuesday morning, simultaneously across multiple platforms. The headline read, "Geologist vindicated. Man mocked for living in cave discovers $300 million mineral deposit hidden for over a century." Sandra Morales had worked fast and thorough. The article chronicled everything. Marcus's career destruction at Apex, his 5 years in the cave, the discovery, the legal battles, the attack. She'd interviewed Vera, who spoke tearfully about watching Marcus survive with dignity. She'd gotten statements from Helen validating the geological significance. She'd even found retired Apex employees who confirmed that Marcus's Silverton reports had been ignored for financial reasons. But the most powerful part was Marcus himself. Sandra had filmed him in the cave, sitting surrounded by his journals and rock samples, explaining in clear scientific terms what he'd found. He showed the historical documents, the journal from 1873, the evidence that this wasn't treasure hunting but legitimate geological discovery. "I've been called crazy for 5 years, Marcus said directly to the camera. "But crazy people don't document their findings. They don't follow proper excavation procedures. They don't study mineral compositions and geological formations. I'm a scientist who happened to be living in the place no one else bothered to look. That's not crazy, that's just unfortunate circumstance meeting professional expertise." The story exploded. Within hours, it was trending on social media. Within a day, major news networks were picking it up, requesting interviews. People across the country became invested in Marcus's story. He wasn't just a man who found treasure, he was the underdog who'd been right all along, the expert dismissed and discarded who proved his worth when no one was watching. The hashtag #CaveJustice started trending, social media filled with comments. "This man survived 5 years of mockery and kept working. That's dedication. Apex Mining destroyed his career, then tried to steal his discovery. Disgusting." Everyone calling him crazy, but he was the only one smart enough to find it. Donations started pouring into a legal defense fund Helen had hastily set up. $50 here, $20 there. Thousands of small contributions from people who wanted to help. Within a week, they'd raised over $200,000 for legal fees. Marcus had lawyers now, real ones. A whole team coordinated by Patricia Chen, who'd taken the case pro bono after reading Sandra's article. News trucks descended on Copper Ridge like a biblical plague. The tiny town suddenly had satellite vans parked on Main Street, correspondents doing stand-ups in front of the cave entrance, producers interviewing anyone who'd talk. The diner was packed with journalists. Vera hired 2 additional servers just to handle the overflow. Sheriff Wilkins found himself doing interviews explaining the attack, the arrest, the ongoing investigation. Brett Holloway became a national symbol of greed and entitlement, his mugshot shared thousands of times with captions about respecting other people's discoveries. And Marcus, the man who'd been invisible, suddenly couldn't walk down the street without being recognized. He did interviews carefully, always with Patricia present, always mindful of not saying anything that could hurt the legal case. But he was honest about his struggles, about the humiliation, about what it meant to finally be vindicated. People responded to that honesty. Marcus wasn't playing the victim or the hero. He was just telling the truth, and the truth resonated. One interview, conducted on the steps of his cave with Autumn standing beside him, went particularly viral. The reporter asked what he'd do with the money if he won his claim. Marcus had looked at Autumn first, then back at the camera. "Give my daughter the future she deserves, and help the town that I've called home for 5 years, even when that town didn't want me." The public pressure worked exactly as Helen predicted. Apex Mining's stock took a hit as the story spread. Their role in both the Silverton disaster and the current claim dispute cast in increasingly negative light. Corporate headquarters received thousands of angry emails, their social media accounts flooded with criticism. The $5 million offer became public knowledge, and financial analysts called it insultingly lowball on major business networks. 2 weeks after the story broke, Apex reached out through their lawyers. They wanted to settle. The negotiation took place in a conference room in Phoenix, Marcus on one side of a massive table with Patricia and her team, Apex's lawyers on the other. Jennifer Caldwell was notably absent, replaced by the company's senior counsel and a VP of operations. "We're prepared to acknowledge Mr. Dane's claim as valid," the senior counsel began. "We'll withdraw our counterclaim based on the historical mining rights." "In exchange for?" Patricia asked. "A reasonable profit-sharing arrangement. The deposit will require significant capital investment to extract properly. Apex has the infrastructure, the expertise, the resources. We propose a 70-30 split, 70% to Apex, 30% to Mr. Dane." "Counter-proposal," Patricia said without hesitation. 60-40, 60% to Mr. Dane. Additionally, $20 million allocated to a historical preservation fund for Copper Ridge, documenting and protecting the site's significance. Apex gets extraction rights and 40% of net profits after expenses. Take it, or we'll see you in court, and given the current public sentiment, I like our chances with a jury. The Apex lawyers conferred quietly. Numbers were run on calculators. Papers were shuffled. Finally, the senior counsel nodded. "We can agree to those terms." Marcus felt Autumn's hand grip his under the table. It was done. He'd won. Well, not completely. Taxes would take a significant chunk. Legal fees, even with the pro bono work and donated funds, would eat more. The extraction process would take years, with profits coming in stages rather than a lump sum. Conservative estimates put Marcus's eventual take at around $70 million after everything. $70 million. Marcus Dane, who'd been counting pennies to buy coffee 3 weeks ago, was going to be worth $70 million. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt numb. The papers were signed. Hands were shaken with professional coldness. Marcus walked out of that conference room and sat in his truck in the parking garage for 20 minutes, just breathing. Autumn sat beside him, equally quiet. Finally, she spoke. "We really did it, didn't we?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "We really did." "What happens now?" "Now?" Marcus started the engine. "Now we figure out what kind of people we want to be with this." The town hall meeting 2 weeks later was even more packed than the first one. But the energy was different, less hostile, more uncertain. People who'd mocked Marcus for years were suddenly forced to confront the fact that he'd been vindicated. People who'd wanted to steal his discovery now knew the whole country had watched them try. Marcus stood at the podium again, but this time he wasn't alone. Patricia stood on one side, Helen on the other, and Autumn sat in the front row with Rebecca. Even Dale was there, sitting quietly, his earlier arrogance notably absent. Sheriff Wilkins called the meeting to order. Mr. Dane has an announcement to make regarding the mineral deposit and its impact on Copper Ridge. Please give him your attention." Marcus cleared his throat, looking out at faces he knew so well. 3 weeks ago, I stood here and told you I'd fight for what was mine. Today, I'm here to tell you that fight is over. I've settled with Apex Mining. The claim is legally mine, with profit-sharing arrangements that will generate significant revenue over the coming years. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some celebratory, some resentful. "I've given a lot of thought to what this means," Marcus continued. "Not just for me and Autumn, but for Copper Ridge. This deposit is part of your history. It exists because miners from this town found it over 150 years ago. They sealed it intending to return, and circumstances prevented that. In a way, I'm just the person who reopened what they discovered." He pulled out a document, held it up. "So today I'm announcing the creation of the Copper Ridge Heritage Foundation. I'm committing $20 million to revitalize this town, a new community center, scholarships for students like Autumn who want to pursue college, small business grants to help Main Street thrive again, and a mining museum that will preserve the history of that discovery, including the sealed chamber itself as the centerpiece." The room erupted. Some people stood, applauding. Others sat in shocked silence. Tom Henderson, the hardware store owner who'd shouted at the last meeting, stood up with tears in his eyes. "Marcus," he said, voice shaking, I owe you an apology. We all do. We treated you terribly, and you're repaying us with generosity we don't deserve." "It's not about deserve," Marcus said quietly. "It's about choosing who we want to be. I could take this money and leave, start over somewhere that doesn't know me as the caveman. But Copper Ridge is my home. It's where Autumn grew up. It's where Vera fed me when I was hungry. It's where Sheriff Wilkins protected me even when he didn't have to. It's complicated and imperfect, but it's home." Vera was crying openly now. The sheriff nodded slowly, respect clear in his expression. Even Brett's father, sitting near the back, looked ashamed. The meeting ended with something Marcus had never experienced in Copper Ridge. People wanting to shake his hand, to thank him, to apologize. Not everyone, some left quickly, unable to reconcile their past treatment of him with his present success. But enough people reached out that Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Belonging. After the crowd dispersed, Rebecca approached. Dale had left already, making some excuse about a phone call. She stood awkwardly, not quite meeting Marcus's eyes. "That was a generous thing you're doing," she said. "It's the right thing." "Marcus, she took a breath. "I owe you an apology, a real one, for not believing in you after Silverton, for leaving when things got hard, for letting Autumn grow up thinking you were someone to be embarrassed about instead of someone to admire." Marcus studied his ex-wife, saw genuine remorse in her face, and felt the old anger try to surface. But it felt tired now, worn out. "I don't need your apology, Rebecca. I needed it 5 years ago when I was sleeping in my car. I needed it when I was eating day-old food from Vera's dumpster. I needed it when Autumn cancelled visits because she was ashamed of me." Rebecca flinched. "But," Marcus continued, his voice softening, "I hope we can both be in Autumn's life going forward. She deserves to have a relationship with both of us without feeling torn in the middle. Can we do that?" "Yes," Rebecca said immediately. "Yes, we can do that." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, and it certainly wasn't reconciliation. But it was peace, and peace was enough. That evening, Marcus and Autumn stood at the cave entrance, watching the sun set over the desert hills. The orange and purple light painted the landscape in colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at. "So," Autumn said, leaning against her father's shoulder, "are we going to get a house now?" Marcus smiled. "Do you want to?" Autumn looked around, at the cave that had been shelter and prison and home all at once, at the desert stretching endlessly, at the sky beginning to fill with stars. "Honestly, I kind of like it here now. It's ours. It's where everything changed, but maybe—" She grinned. "Running water would be nice?" Marcus laughed, actually laughed. "Running water? Indoor plumbing? Maybe even central heating. We can probably arrange that. We could build something, Autumn suggested. Not buy some fancy house in Phoenix. Build something here, something that's ours from the ground up. You're good at building things, Dad. You built a whole life out of nothing. Marcus's throat tightened. I like that idea. Building something together. What do you think it should look like? They stood there as darkness fell, planning a home that didn't exist yet, a future neither of them had dared imagine a month ago. And for the first time in 5 years, Marcus Dane felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. 6 months later, Copper Ridge was almost unrecognizable. The community center was under construction, a modern building that would house a library, meeting rooms, and computer labs. 3 small businesses on Main Street had reopened with foundation grants. The high school had a new scholarship program that would send 5 students to college every year. And the Copper Ridge Mining Museum was in its final stages, the sealed chamber preserved and accessible via guided tours that were already booked months in advance. Marcus lived in a new house now, modest by wealthy standards, but luxurious compared to the cave. 2 bedrooms, large windows, solar panels on the roof because old habits died hard. It sat on the property he'd purchased that included the cave itself, which remained preserved as part of the historical site. But he still visited the cave most mornings, drinking coffee while watching the sunrise, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. This evening, Helen was visiting. She'd become a close friend, someone who checked in regularly and visited whenever her academic schedule allowed. They sat on folding chairs at the cave entrance, the familiar desert wind carrying the scent of sage and dust. "Any regrets?" Helen asked, sipping coffee from a travel mug. "About what?" "Living in a cave for 5 years, being the town joke, all of it." Marcus thought for a long moment, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "No," he said finally, "because if I'd given up, if I'd left, if I'd listened to everyone who said I was crazy or pathetic or wasting my life, I would have missed it, all of it. The money? No, not the money." He gestured at the landscape, the town visible in the distance, lights beginning to come on as darkness approached. The proof that I was right, that I wasn't broken or finished or worthless, that sometimes the world is wrong and you just have to wait for the truth to surface. Literally, in this case. Helen smiled. "You've given a lot of people hope, you know. I get emails from former students, colleagues, people who heard your story. They tell me it inspired them to keep going with their own research, their own struggles. You proved that being dismissed doesn't mean being wrong. I just followed the evidence. That's exactly my point. You trusted yourself when no one else did. That's not easy. That's actually the hardest thing any scientist can do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of fire. Then Autumn's car appeared on the path, engine straining slightly on the rough terrain. She parked and walked over, carrying a thermos. "Brought more coffee," she announced. "Figured you'd be out here getting all philosophical." "We were just discussing regrets," Helen said. "Dad doesn't do regrets," Autumn said, pouring herself a cup. "He does stubborn persistence until reality catches up with him." Marcus laughed. "Is that how you see it?" "That's how it is." Autumn sat on the ground between them, looking up at the darkening sky. "You know what I told my college advisor? She asked what I learned from my father. I said I learned that being right isn't enough. You have to be willing to stand by what's right even when everyone thinks you're crazy, even when it costs you everything. Because eventually, truth proves itself." "What did she say?" Marcus asked. "She said that was the best answer she'd heard in 20 years of advising students." Autumn smiled. "Apparently, I'm my father's daughter." "Apparently you are," Marcus said softly. The 3 of them sat together as stars began to emerge, scattered across the velvet darkness like promises kept. Below them, Copper Ridge glowed with lights that represented renewed hope, second chances, and the kind of transformation that happens when one person's vindication becomes an entire community's redemption. Marcus thought about the journey, from respected geologist to disgraced failure to cave-dwelling outcast to the man who proved them all wrong. It had been brutal, humiliating, exhausting. But it had also been necessary, every painful step leading to this moment. Sometimes the people society laughs at are the ones who see what everyone else missed. Sometimes the outcasts are really just those who refuse to stop looking. Marcus had spent 5 years being invisible, but he'd never stopped being a scientist. Never stopped studying, documenting, following evidence to its logical conclusion. And now he stood vindicated, not just by the fortune he'd discovered, but by the integrity he'd maintained throughout. The wealth would change his life, yes, but the real transformation had happened long before the settlement check cleared. It had happened in the cave, in the daily choice to survive with purpose instead of giving up, in the decision to keep being who he was even when the world said that person had no value. True wealth, Marcus had learned, wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in dignity maintained, in beliefs proven correct, in the ability to look yourself in the mirror and know you hadn't compromised who you were for comfort or approval. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said to his companions. "People keep congratulating me on the money, and I appreciate it. But what I'm really proud of? I'm proud that when everyone said I should quit geology, should stop studying rocks, should just get a normal job and move on, I didn't. I kept doing the work. That's what geologists do. We study the earth, we look for patterns, we trust the evidence, and eventually, the earth reveals its secrets." "To those patient enough to listen," Helen added. "And stubborn enough to keep digging," Autumn finished. Marcus raised his coffee cup. "To stubbornness, then. May it continue serving us well." They clinked cups as the last light faded from the western sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. The desert wind picked up, carrying the eternal smell of stone and sand. And Marcus Dane, the man who'd lived in a cave and emerged with a fortune, sat surrounded by the only wealth that really mattered. People who saw his worth even when he had nothing to prove it. The cave behind them stood silent, its secrets revealed, its purpose served. It was no longer a home, but a monument, to persistence, to scientific inquiry, to the simple truth that sometimes you have to dig deeper than anyone else is willing to go to find what's really valuable. And sometimes what you find isn't just gold and gemstones. Sometimes it's yourself, proven and vindicated, standing in the light you earned. Anyone can give up when life gets hard. Anyone can walk away when society judges them worthless. But choosing to stay, to keep working, to trust yourself when no one else does, that's the real treasure. That's what transforms a cave into a palace and a broken man into someone who changes not just his life, but an entire town's future. Marcus had been mocked, dismissed, and forgotten. But he'd never stopped being a geologist, never stopped looking for the truth beneath the surface. And in the end, patience and conviction didn't just move mountains, they moved fortunes hidden beneath them. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories that will move you. Click now to keep exploring with us, and hit subscribe if you believe the underdogs deserve their day.